Good evening, friends on Facebook. We have a special Pub Theology with our good friend Justin Hill with the Alamo Hour podcast. Welcome, Justin.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so if you're confused what this is going on, Justin Hill runs a podcast called the Alamo Hour. It's a destination podcast for those who want to take an in-depth look at different people, places, events, and happenings in San Antonio, Texas. He's a local attorney, and this podcast is going to dive deep into the city that we all love so much. And he hosts that about every week. And you can listen to his podcast on YouTube or various podcast channels like Apple and SoundCloud and all those things. And Justin is a graduate of Texas A&M University, graduated in 2004. We just learned that we're the same age. And so we have merged platforms today. So the Alamo Hour and Pub Theology are the same broadcast. So welcome, Justin.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me. And since we're kind of co-host, I will introduce you. Gavin's a associate minister at Travis Park Church. To me, I always like to have people on that I think a little bit more about than the resume. And to me, you've always sort of run a really good live as you speak way of life with all of your social justice stuff. And I mean, I look up to you in terms of you put your money where your mouth is, but really your time where your heart is. And I appreciate that. And I think you do so much for people. But you're also the host of Pub Theology. Pub Theology is a dialogue group that usually meets at the Friendly Spot, but because of COVID, we're meeting online. You talk about faith, the community in San Antonio, creating common good. And I love the slogan, different brews and different views, all perspectives welcome.
Yeah. So, what are you drinking today? Justin?
Well, I've got a sparkling water from Kirkland, but I also have a St. Arnold's Art Car IPA.
Good Texas beer. I've never had this one, the Freetail Bat Out of Hells. So, we're a Pub Theology theme, so there's a hell theme there, but it has a San Antonio scene there. So, I
had Ian from Dorchel on, and I drank other people's beer the whole time, and he seemed offended, but he didn't bring me any beer to drink, so I didn't.
Hey, that's fair. Hey, it's good. Yeah. No, I really respect you, Justin. You've been serving in around town at various events and been supporting political candidates. You are involved in everything I know about. You're also good friends with my good friend Phil Watkins, who goes to our church, and great local attorneys in town. And the stuff that you promote it always connects with me, and I think a lot of the people who listen to Pub Theology and probably the Alamo Hour. And you started this Alamo Hour maybe at the start of 2020.
So at the start of the shutdown, I'd always wanted to do it, and all of a sudden I had time on my hands, so I was able to do it. I had started buying the equipment, troubleshooting, but then once the shutdown happened, I didn't have an excuse anymore.
Wow, that's great. And who's been your favorite guest so far? Oh. You've now had maybe like 15, 20 episodes?
This is 25.
Oh, wow. That's great. Yeah.
You know, I like the meaty, dense stuff. So I've had some really interesting, these epidemiologists, including Dr. Roar Allegrini from here in San Antonio. Dr. Lesh is a Syrian expert. Some of those things have been really interesting. A surprise one is I had a guy who was the Texas League Commissioner of Baseball for 20-something years and wrote books on it. And I thought it was going to be dry and boring. And really, it was just super interesting to hear the story of Texas League AA baseball. So I've had some really great storytellers, and, I walk away from them and feel one way, but then I get a whole bunch of people responding about what they think about them. So it's just been fun. It's been fun to get to know new people and kind of share their stories.
I want to remind our listeners that as you listen today, if you're listening through the Pub Theology live Facebook stream, which is I know we share this with different watch parties and different groups, but if you're watching it on our Pub Theology live page, you can post comments and we will see those. Justin and I will see those, and we'll answer any of your questions. Justin believes that any topic is up for discussion. So do we at Pub Theology. We talk about everything. That's why it's different views and different brews. And you can go to his website, thealamohour.com, to learn more about all the different podcasts that he has had, 25, including Mayor Ron Nierenberg and great doctors during COVID. Go to there, and if you can always follow us at Pub Theology SA, at our Facebook page or YouTube channel. He's been going online for 25 episodes. I think we started right after the pandemic, and we never have been online. We've always promoted our events live at the Friendly Spot, but I think we live in a new world now, right? We live in a new world where all this is going to become a new reality for years to come. So
It's a new deal. And I mean, it's funny. I started a podcast and you're doing a podcast about San Antonio essentially with this. And I sort of joke that if this was in any other city, I would be way behind the curve. But San Antonio, we're slow to adopt technology and new things. And so,
Sure.
We're both, at the forefront of this, which, good for us.
No, that's great. And I really enjoyed your episodes. I did listen to the COVID doctor recently, the epidemiologist, I believe, right?
Yeah. Dr. Slutkin's been advising with governors and mayors, including Ron Nirenberg. And
sure.
He's a million things you could talk about with that guy, but he was really interesting and very gracious to agree to do my, lowly little podcast.
That's great.
So I want to start with you, Gavin. So I do this on all of,
do it.
See Phil reaching out. So I do this on all of my podcasts. Since this is joint, I'm going to go through at least my general top 10. This is supposed to be kind of short and pithy. So when and why did you move to San Antonio?
I moved to San Antonio after I graduated grad school. So I think we probably went. Did you go to law school right after A&M? Like, did you jump right into it? So yeah, so 3-year degrees. So I graduated at Duke Divinity School after I went to Baylor, and I had a few jobs lined up after, at various churches. One in Houston, I remember. One was in Tyler, Texas, and one was in San Antonio. And my sister still lives in San Antonio. She after graduating from A&M, she became a teacher and a principal here. And so it was like, oh, my sister's here. I thought it was a great city to live in that I hadn't really experienced much, other than vacations. And it felt like a different story I could create than moving back to Houston, where I'm from, or the Woodlands, or I didn't really want to go to Tyler, Texas. So I landed in San Antonio. My first church was University Methodist Church on Days of Allah Road.
But Tyler is beautiful. I have a
beautiful. Yeah, it's great.
I'm surprised how pretty it is.
I didn't want to probably move there as a 26, 7, 8. I can't remember how old I was, year old to.
I don't blame you.
So
yeah. I think we met through Jody Newman, who's been on, I'm sure, your show, my show. And I met her when she was first Queen Anchovy. So next question, what was your favorite Corniation character that you played?
Well, I played only 3.
Okay.
And 2 of them have been the same. I played Ozzy Osbourne in 2 of those. And the first time we played Ozzy, obviously, I didn't really want to play Ozzy the third time, but it was just the skit Lynn that it just we had to do it. But the first time I played Ozzy probably got the most rousing laughter when we made fun of the downtown loo that was put in by Roberto Trevino, and Jody and I wrote that skit along with Leah Denham. And we just had a blast with that. I think the next character was the Confederate statue that was removed, so I had to play a Confederate soldier. So that was fun in a way. But Ozzy Osbourne for sure.
Well, I was wondering how Ozzy's still relevant. My next question you already answered, which was what beer were you drinking? We talked about this. Is the only one I gave you the heads up on. I was going to be asking you is what are your favorite hidden gems in the city? And you said a restaurant, so I want to know restaurant, but also sort of non-restaurant location or thing in the city.
Ooh, good. My favorite restaurant is Maria Cafe, kind of south of Southtown on, I think it's Nogalitos, I believe that. I love that place. The family-run restaurant there is a blast. I mean, you can get brisket nachos, and you can make anything you want there. I think they have a name for everything. So if you order something different, they'll make it the Justin Hill Enchilada Special, So I love that. I love Maria's.
Do you have a dish named after you?
I don't. I know John Barrera does. If he's part of our Corniation group too, but but I just love the family that works there and runs that operation.
So the first time I really hung out with John, other than meeting him, was watching Obama's first inauguration speech in 2008. I mean, that's my history with John Barrera.
Okay, yeah, that is Corniation. So and through Jody as well. So I by the way, we really want to support the Friendly Spot. It's back open. And social distancing. So we really want to support that. Please support locals, support places like the Friendly Spot and all things around San Antonio that are open during this COVID crisis.
Favorite hidden gem that's not a restaurant or bar?
Ooh, this is going to be a tough one. My favorite hidden gem is probably the trail that's right behind King William that crosses into Blue Star, and you cross the river on those rocks. I love that walk, and I love walking around that part of the Mission Reach and down into, obviously now you can always go all the way down, but I've always really cherished that one strip, especially when it was more not known. It's known now, but 10 years ago when I lived by Brackenridge High School, I loved that spot.
I've never done it. And you drive by and you see it, and it's got the little weird carve out there, and I've still never done it.
Yeah, so it's like, there's Alamo Street, then you go toward the Missions just by probably 200 yards, and you can crawl down some stairs off of Blue Star, and you cross the river on some stones, and you get into the King William neighborhood. It's like a back way to get into King William. I love that little area.
I'm going to do it. You meet with a bunch of leaders. You talk about a lot of social justice issues day to day. What do you think the biggest issue facing the city is right now outside of COVID?
Yeah, well, yeah. Okay, so that's good. We don't have to talk about COVID. We've talked about COVID so much. I mean, I only speak to certain leaders about certain topics, right? I don't speak to everyone about everything. And mainly, I think generational poverty is probably the number one thing. The report that came out that said San Antonio does not do very well. Like, we're like the top on the list, right? Depending on what list you look at.
Yeah, the most stratified financially or economically of all major cities, right?
That's right. And I think that with the way we need to tackle that is difficult. And especially when it comes to issues of race and redlining in the past, and the kind of the skeletons in the closet there that really keep us from moving forward. I'm guilty of it. We're all guilty of it. We're people of privilege, even in this gentrification movement, and I'm learning where I'm at fault. And I think that we just have to have honest conversations about that, and really how to work with the homeless situation in downtown too. Obviously, that's something that I'm passionate about, but I think homelessness is part of that discussion of the overall poverty in San Antonio.
So I always talk to people about what they're passionate about. That's sort of what got me going on the Alamo Hour.
Sure.
And I had to sort of check myself on what really I'm passionate about. Homelessness has always been one of those things since I was a little kid. So that's one of the questions I had for you. You're really involved with Corazon Ministries. What is the best way the average person like myself, who is not, embedded with the ministries or the homelessness outreach, what's the best way they can help?
Yeah, I think this is always important. I just actually spoke to the Alamo Heights Rotary Club, right? And I speak to Rotary Club. I'm in the Downtown Rotary Club. I've been a member of the Downtown Rotary Club for, I think, 12 years now.
You're gonna admit that?
I'll sit at the table at Rotary still, and they'll be like, "So, did you just join?" I'm like, "No, I've been a member for 12 years," because they think everybody's old there,
Yeah.
But when I speak at those places, they always ask the question, what can we do, right? What can we do to serve the homeless? And I think a lot of people want me to respond in a way like, go volunteer at a soup kitchen, go volunteer at Haven for Hope, serve food on a plate. But really, all the requirement of serving food on a plate is a wrist turn. Like, if your wrist can turn and put the mashed potatoes on a plate, like, you qualify to volunteer. It's a very low bar. I really want people to start volunteering with the homeless differently. I would actually love, instead of the Rotary Club coming down to volunteer and fold clothes or serve food, I'd want them to actually eat meals with them once a week. And they're like, "Oh, we don't want to eat food. That's the homeless food." And I'm like, "No, that's cheap. Food is very, very cheap to cook." And having conversations with people to be vulnerable with one another, that's the hard part, right? Okay. And I think those are when relationships can be formed, because you start learning what you have in common. You can start learning where you can provide opportunities. They can teach you things that you don't know. And I think that's where transformation happened. Homelessness is really about trauma care. And Trinity University's freshmen did a study years ago with Edwin Blanton. I don't know if you know him. He's an educator around town. I think I don't know where he is now, maybe Texas A&M San Antonio, but he led his freshman group to talk about trauma care. And they said there's different levels of trauma care. Haven for Hope would just say level 2 or 3. There's advanced counseling, there's religious groups. Those are kind of advanced levels of trauma care. What San Antonio does poorly on, and a lot of cities do poorly on, is level 1 trauma care. And that's just interactions between me and you, interactions with anybody that we can treat normal areas of trauma by just conversations, the way we look people in the eyes, if we say their name or not. And I think we need to better understand how to treat level 1 trauma care, because that's not the responsibility of the doctors. That's not responsibilities of the caseworkers. That's the responsibility of all citizens in a community. So that makes sense.
Being human.
Yeah, being human. Yeah. And
I wanted to do that. Do I come down to one of the kitchens or a feeding opportunity and just?
Sure, you could reach out to Corazon Ministries or Travis Park Church, or probably even Haven for Hope, and say, I really want to mentor people. And they have mentor programs. I got to give a shout out to my favorite nonprofit that works for the homeless. And I'm not going to say Corazon. It's the SA Hope Center, run by Megan Legacy and team. They're on the west side, and now they have a downtown location at First Presbyterian Church. And they do counseling, job training. They just got a huge grant to house about 80 people in apartments during COVID.
Wow.
And they really do a holistic look. They don't do the Band-Aid operations that we often serve in homeless work. They are really they're pushing us to be more holistic in our homeless services, and they do a wonderful job. So check them out, SA Hope Center, or San Antonio Hope Center. So,
okay, 2 more questions. Duke or Baylor? Those are your 2 alma maters.
yep.
Which one? Who do you pull for? Which one's
so I didn't really have to worry about this too much until Baylor played Duke in the Elite Eight. Sometime, when Duke won the national championship in 2010, and they played in Houston, and I wore a Baylor shirt in the Sweet 16 game, and I wore a Duke shirt, and then they had to play each other, and I wore a Duke shirt. I was actually in charge of the basketball committee at Duke. You could run for it. It's kind of like being a yell leader at A&M.
Okay.
And so I managed the Cameron Crazies for 1 year.
While you were in seminary?
While I was in seminary, yeah. It was the coolest thing I did in seminary.
Yeah.
And I met the best friends, because all those people in that basketball committee were like chemists, lawyers, doctors, undergrads. So I had a blast, and now my heart bleeds blue. Now, if it comes to football and they played Duke, I'd probably go for sure. I would root for Baylor football.
Duke's been coming up in that too, though.
Duke's gotten better, yeah, because the coach. But yeah, people are like, what are y'all talking about? But yeah.
Okay, last question. People always ask me, why did you become a lawyer? What brought you to the ministry?
I grew up in the Churches of Christ, which is a denomination that Max Lucado was a Church of Christ minister, and both my grandfathers were Church of Christ ministers, and so both my parents are preachers' kids, and I really loved my granddads. And one of them was very, very progressive, went to Southern Methodist for seminary, which is like totally unusual for a Church of Christ pastor in the 1940s. And so that influenced my life, and I really wanted to do what they did. And so the more progressive pastor died when I was 10, and then the other one died when I was like 21, and I knew him better. And so when I was growing up, he would allow me to go to his church and like preach and like kind of get into ministry. And that's how I got led into it for like kind of my early life. And then when I was at Baylor, I worked for Young Lifes in Waco, and I was at a Conley High School, and I had a student get killed in a drive-by. And that moment is when I realized I wanted to do this the rest of my life and kind of do pastoral care.
I mean, that's a really good story.
Yeah. I can't talk about it too much. I can focus on my granddads, but that Baylor moment really altered. It's really the reason why I went to seminary. Young Life people usually don't go to seminary right after, so I thought I was just going to be a Young Life leader, but that got me to push me to do a little bit more studies in the ideas of theology and pastoral care.
Yeah, that's a big jump from Young Life to really
university. Yeah. I got my hiney kicked, let's say, going from like this, very like active Christianity to at Duke, where their program is 100% academic. They don't care that you went to camps or you said the right thing. So I'm grateful for that, because I knew the other stuff. I didn't know that other side of things. So,
all right. So that's my top 10. I mean,
you do that every week. The top 10 list.
It always changes, though. I mean, obviously, I don't ask a scientist what brought them to the ministry, but I always do a top 10 list. There's a few normal, but I never tell the people.
I have a question of you. How do you know? We talked about Phil Watkins. He's just commented right here. Look, I'm going to show you how we can do comments here. Justin, good to see you staying active during the quarantine. How do you know Phil Watkins, the best lawyer in town?
So, well, I mean, 1A and 1B, obviously. 1B, 1A. Okay. So as a young lawyer working for Michael Watts, and his wife was on your show, I always heard about Phil Watkins, kind of legend Phil Watkins in the Dimmitt, Maverick, Zavala County areas of South Texas. And then as I moved, through the legal profession and got to know more people, I became really good friends with his daughter, Beth, who's a justice on the fourth court. And we worked cases together before she went on. And then Phil and I became friends. He was very gracious about some of the stuff I did with his daughter in terms of some of the good cases we worked on. He bought me a fantastic book that's kind of a compendium of different lawyers talking about good works. And then he started these happy hours of local lawyers, which I've made some really good friends out of just those happy hours. So it was I knew who Phil was before I knew Phil.
Yeah, Phil is one of my heroes at Travis Park. Corazon started 21 years ago now. And it started in various, like programs. They didn't always serve 7 meals a day like we do during COVID, or even 4 meals a day, or 4 meals a week. Sorry. They started with a prayer circle and recovery group that meets on Wednesday nights, and they serve dinner. And the way it operates now, and I think it's operated almost the entire time of that program with Phil and a great group of volunteers that have been there since the beginning. If let's say, a lot of churches collect prayer requests, like I'm going to pray for my aunt, I'm going to pray for somebody in the hospital. And we collect those at either on Sunday morning at church or throughout the week, and they can call us or write us in. He cuts up those prayers into different individual prayers and passes it to the homeless. And the homeless clients of ours for Corazon, our guests, is the prayer team at Travis Park Church. It's like inverted. It's the opposite of what you think it would be. And Phil is the designer of that. And it really brings a whole new life and energy to our homeless guests that have an opportunity to give back. They're not asking for things. They're actually giving prayers to people they don't even know.
Yeah.
And Phil is the best at that. And it taught me a lot about how to appropriately work with people on the streets.
So that's not surprising with Phil. And I also hear that Phil is not scared to say what he thinks should be done within the church. No.
I mean, no one is at Travis Park. If you know Travis Park Church, they are not afraid of controversy. Travis Park Church is a radical group. They even in the World War II, they were hosting
a radical group.
I love them. That's why I want to work there. That's why I wanted to work there. Right. So, I mean, since the very beginning, they've been doing things. And then in the World War II area, they were allowing people to escape internment camps to sleep at Travis Park, like they did during the migrant increase just a few years ago. So he's a part of that coalition that always stands for what is right and what they believe is right. And even when it's not very popular in the Christian tradition or even the Methodist Church or anything, all the above.
So we had talked about doing a podcast together, and really the impetus of doing a podcast together was that we have podcasts essentially. So what are you trying to establish with yours, and what's the story you're kind of trying to tell with your podcast?
Yeah, so this is kind of new for us, right? So at the Friendly Spot, when we started, I met Jody 4 or 5 years ago now, and 4 years ago I came with an idea. I said, hey, I just want to do like a table where we bring in a priest or a rabbi. People can just go around a table at the Friendly Spot, maybe put some chairs together, and they can have like pastor on a hot seat, rabbi on a hot seat, and they can just ask questions. And so for a few weeks, that's all Pub Theology was. And then people started recommending guests like, oh, we should interview a clergy about LGBT issues, or we should interview a clergy that's at Cornerstone, right? Or we should interview, and then it became that. And then all of a sudden, hey, you know what? We should interview Ron Nierenberg because of the vandalization that just happened at the Jewish synagogues. And he spoke up against that. So we brought in Ron to speak about that. I think our fifth time at Pub Theology. Ron was a councilman in District 8. And that started changing. All of a sudden, the guests we started inviting Bob Rivard was our fifth guest, I think. So he was one of your early guests.
Yeah.
And then we had educators, and then we started getting co-hosts. Becca McNeil joined us, who's a reporter around town. She used to work for the Rivard Report. Now she's an editor for Christianity Today and 74 Million, which is an educational news agency. And we just started, and she gets guests that I can never get. And we just started meeting at the Friendly Spot and not being almost like a podcast or like a forum place. Like you can go to PK, you can go to TED Talks and hear somebody talk. We were like, what is it? What if we have that same person and you can drink a beer with them and discuss theology or faith or community, and you get to actually have a direct conversation with the mayor. The first mayor we had was actually Mayor Ivy Taylor when she was mayor in San Antonio. So that, and then really only recently have we gone online. People have been asking us to go online for a long time, but we just couldn't figure out how to do it like sound wise with a live bar. And we didn't really want to really do that at the start, but COVID has really forced us to do this. And it's been great. We get thousands of people watching you now instead of maybe on a good night, 150 people at the Friendly Spot. And usually or sometimes we just have 40 or 30. And so what's been great is I look back on our events, we've had 130 something events since we started at the Friendly Spot. And I think over time we've had this is months ago when I looked, so like 7,000 people come through the Friendly Spot to attend. And so if you look at it that way, it was a very interesting way to get people involved in these discussions. And I hope that's what we're really all about, even when we stay online. So what got it for you?
Platform.
Say that again?
Shared platform.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what got into it for me was, San Antonio is a social city, so I don't want to say, I have a problem, but sometimes we go have happy hours with people. And I just started realizing I've met some just fascinating people. And, I'll tell people like, oh, I met this guy at happy hour and here's his story. And people were really interested in knowing what other people's stories were. And then I think people were interested in knowing what else is in San Antonio. One of my guests is David Lesh, who's a professor at Trinity. I mean, he personally befriended the dictator of Syria. I'm sure he calls himself a democratically elected president, but I mean, that's a strange story that is in our city. And he was working to negotiate a peace agreement during the Syrian civil war. And he's a Trinity professor. I mean, and that's just one of a bunch of stories. So, I think it's fun to hear those people tell their stories. And I wanted to provide a platform in a casual way because nobody's going to probably pick up his book that is the compendium of the history of the Middle East. But he'll sit here and have a beer and tell me stories. And I wanted to share those kind of stories.
So again, if you want to ask questions to Justin or myself about anything San Antonio related, political, religiously, socially, anything about San Antonio, or really anything about anything, you can post these questions on our Pub Theology live feed. And if you don't do that, we probably won't see it. So make sure you post your comments on there. That's how it works right now with our streaming services. We're all learning how to do this together. So Justin, you've been involved in, I would say, local government. It's not always politics, right? It's involved community discussions, leadership. When did you get really involved in that? Like, so you've been here for about 12 years. What point did you say, okay, I really want to get really hyper focused on campaigns or the right people in local government or just connecting people, networking people, where we kind of cross over in that way? But what got you involved? What was the first thing that really pulled you in?
So, I mean, I've always had a soft spot for politics and all of these issues. I mean, I wrote for the paper at A&M. I was at A&M, I was a moderate, but for A&M at that time, I was a bleeding heart liberal. And so I've always been into sort of understanding and trying to provide some sort of moderating factor. Really, honestly, my mom's a social worker. I came from a social worker background with her. People are people. And I think our politics are kind of mean.
Yeah.
So, when I moved here, San Antonio, met me with such open arms. I didn't know anybody when I moved here. I moved here because Michael Watts gave me a job and told me to move here. And I loved the city. I loved the inclusiveness of the city. The city feels like New Orleans, that weird thing where you can just go out one day to a park or a bar or restaurant and make friends for life. And I wanted to not be somebody that sat on the sidelines. So, I'm involved in ways that affect my industry. I'm an attorney, but I think Ron's heart's in the right place in a lot of ways. And I want to support people whose hearts are in the right place because I want to raise a family here and be here for a long time. And I don't want to be one of those people that's just, moaning on the sidelines.
No, that's why I love San Antonio too. I didn't know I was going to like San Antonio. The first 3 years I was working in the north side. Even though I lived in the Cadillac Lofts downtown, I was working on the far north side. And this is even before, like, you had to actually go out into like the Stone Oak shopping centers to have fun. I don't remember doing those things. But then when the downtown movement started happening, maybe 8 years ago, and it really changed the dynamic of these parks and the way we get out and interact, it hooked I fell in love with it because it felt like New Orleans. It felt like this larger city, but still small enough to engage. And now when I go to Dallas and Houston, or my hometown, Houston, in the Woodlands area, I drive there and I'm like, I don't think I could live here. I really love this community. And sometimes I can learn how to explain it, but it really is something I think we're both passionate about and why we're probably both involved in trying to make it the best city as best we can. So,
yeah. So then you sort of think through, my podcast, I really try to avoid politics. I want people to tell their stories. There's a few things that I'll pop up on. I mean, you're friends with me on Facebook. So, I mean, there's plenty of things I care a lot about and passionate about, but I don't want my podcast to be
I see that.
Yeah. I mean, I want it to be a forum for discussion, and I'll guide that discussion to some extent, but I want everybody to think through what their thoughts and opinions are and have a reason to say them. And maybe I disagree with what those reasons are, but if they're reasoned, I mean, good for you for having those positions. What I want to know is sort of, just, I'm going to, I'm always selfish about these things a little bit. How is your backlash from being kind of in terms of your work as a social justice, I'd say warrior almost. I mean, you take on the plight of the poor, the plight of the immigrant, you make it your own, you advocate for it, and yet you're a minister, which has become sort of so aligned with conservative politics, unfairly so, but it has. I mean, have you dealt with backlash from that or dealt with people that disagree with you? Obviously, Travis Park is a different kind of church, but you are a religious leader. So, I mean, do you get some of that backlash?
Sure. It's grown over time, right? Right in my early days, I might have been a progressive youth minister. I might have been a progressive pastor within Trinity Baptist where I worked, or Christ Episcopal Church was a very conservative Episcopal church. And I've always kind of enjoyed being that kind of liberal voice. But in the last few years, it's been tough. Jody Newman knows this, so I'm very close to Jody, and she sees my inner belly. She sees my darkest sides, and where we take things personally. And in 2018, the end of 2018 and 2019, during that immigration, where I traveled with the migrant caravan, and then right after that, just unconnected but connected, our church hosted 22,000 migrants at our church, and we had InfoWars come in and try to interview us and raid the city offices, and they toured our church, and all of a sudden my phone is blowing up with 3,000 messages, and I'm like, whoa! And most of them were not kind. I have never experienced that, and it really took it out of me for a while. Like, I really had to evaluate, honestly, go to therapy and learn how to place that appropriately in my life, because I never had to deal with it. I mean, it was, standing up for the homeless is tough, and it's challenging, but it's not necessarily controversial within the worlds I live in, conservative or liberal. So the immigration thing really was hard for me, and to manage being a white voice within that. And I had to learn when not to talk and allow other people of color to speak during this journey where you were all on. And I still don't get it right. And so I think that's been the toughest thing for me to manage personally, but also just the critiques. I remember one, I think it was sometime during the caravan, where a person that we probably, if I said it, I'm in a more San Antonio environment, but she's politically involved and very faith-based kind of politician. Not anybody who has been elected into any major office, but she wrote me one time and said, "Hey, Gavin, the migrants are stealing our stuff. Do you believe stealing is wrong? It says in the Bible, right? Thou shalt not steal." And I'm like, dude, I used to feed into that stuff. I used to respond to it. Yeah. I learned not to respond to it anymore. I don't even care. But so I wrote back, said, yes, it does say thou shalt not steal in the Bible a few times, actually. The 10 Commandments are mentioned twice in the Bible. And she said, well, if somebody steals your coat, are you supposed to give it to them? And I thought she was joking, because at that point, because that's a direct question Jesus was asked. Actually, I Googled, copied and pasted her question she asked me verbatim, Googled it, and the first thing on Google was the actual scripture where Jesus is asked, if somebody steals your coat, and honestly, it says you should not sue them. You should not just give them a coat, right? Like, and it says it in different ways in different gospels, but the overall message there is you don't really need to worry about it. It's just a coat,
right?
So all I did was respond back to that with the scripture, and my Facebook feed exploded, and that's when I realized I couldn't do that anymore. Like, I just needed to believe what I believed, share what I believed, and not really debate on social media. So I think that was the hardest things, and I still don't get it right. I still have great friends of mine within liberal circles that remind me of my privilege and my things that can get in the way of some of these really hard conversations. But when it comes to the church, I'm kind of okay. Like, I know there's a big divide within progressive and conservative Christianity. It doesn't surprise me anymore. And I just kind of say, it's freedom of religion, and I'm going to stick with the gospel I understand. And that leads me to a more progressive understanding of a community. And so now religiously, I'm okay. It's just when you get involved in politics, and I dabbled in that a few years ago, like just getting more involved in local politics, supporting candidates. And I realized that can be very tricky as a pastor. So I pulled away a little bit when it comes to those things. And so that, I don't want to overspeak that, but that's mainly it. So.
Well, you hit on a good point. If you're using social media, you're always going to be told to check your something. So yeah. No matter what you say, you're always going to be from the people that agree with you and the people that don't agree with you. Yeah. I've just started blocking people on Facebook now. It's just Facebook I use to scroll through news articles is what I've decided is the only reason I want to use it. Every so often I will get into the debate, but I shouldn't.
Yeah, no, it's not very helpful usually. I don't really remember a time it has been super helpful. So, but I think what shocked me more was the amount of hate that came out of people in these things. Even when they try to hate on people they don't understand or they feel like they're not, that's what really wears me down. And so we just have to look at it differently and surround ourselves with good people. Like Jody really helped me see things differently when those comments come up. And my friends were kind of like my pastors during that time. So.
Well, I've been to Pub Theology a few times, and I've always sort of appreciated the idea that, because that's how my take has always been on it. Like, this should be a very inclusive discussion all the time. The mixture of the politics and the faith has really, I think, led to a bunch of division among people and probably families that isn't well deserved.
No, I don't think religion should be very complex. I think it's a very personal thing for a lot of people. Obviously, that's why we have different denominations and spiritualities and ways to do things, and non-believers and agnostics and atheists. But it shouldn't be complicated too hard. Loving somebody, learning how to serve other people, and see each other, see the common humanity with one and all of us is actually very simple. And I think that simplicity is actually what gets people upset. They can't believe it's that easy. It can't be that simple. Grace can't be that easy. And then there's some complex things, right, in theology. But in the end, love is what really wins out. And I think it's always gotten in people trouble. Anybody in history that has championed this has gotten themselves in trouble. So it's nothing new, but it was new for me at the time.
So you got a question?
I do. And one thing we don't talk about in Pub Theology often is law stuff. I don't think we've done education, we've done all this stuff. We've done authors and scientists and the list can go on. Reporters and nonprofit leaders. I don't know if we've had a lawyer.
Probably because we're boring.
We did have a lawyer. We did have Shannon Sedgwick Davis, who was a lawyer who wrote the book To Catch a Warlord, and she uses that angle. But we haven't really talked about like you're a personal injury lawyer, I believe. Is that it?
Yeah.
So okay, this is my question.
Okay.
This is the only ads I see on billboards.
Sure.
Right. So what is it like to be a personal injury lawyer in a town where there's so many famous personalities within your field?
Misunderstood.
So what is the biggest misunderstanding about personal injury lawyers?
So, I think the misunderstanding is well-deserved due to some people in our industry. Look at Thomas J. Henry's TV. He created a TV show for his own family.
Sure.
That includes his jets and his planes and all of those things. On the backside of him making that money were thousands of people who got compensation for, probably in those cases, a lot of drugs that caused bad injuries to people. So people, especially children, they were prescribed drugs that were supposed to never be prescribed to children and caused certain medical conditions. I think that's probably where he really got off to the races, because it's all written about in the Huffington Post. But there are stories behind his opulence that aren't being told. And I think that's unfortunate, because it trickles down to the idea that plaintiffs' lawyers are opulent and over the top and obscene maybe. But for me, I think all of that's just a distraction in the reality of we do good work for good people, and some people make a lot of money. And some people are in it for business reasons, and their whole thing is that clients are widgets. And there's a lot of us that are in it because we enjoy the fight. And I personally really enjoy the fight. I like to represent a normal person against an insurance company or a corporation who's being screwed over. To me, it's motivating to me. But yeah, our industry is maligned, and it's probably well deserved because of things like that.
Do you have a number? Do you have a catchphrase?
No.
No, you need one. You need a catchphrase, Justin.
A buddy of mine did the Texas.
Where did you grow up in Texas?
I grew up on the border of Oklahoma in a town called Burke Burnett. So if you went 281 north until you hit Oklahoma, the last town you would hit would be Burke Burnett.
Wow. And so you went to Texas A&M. Now, did you grow up? Oh, good. We have a question from Kristen.
So earlier when I said do you have a question? I said there's a question. I meant that, but you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't. That one just popped up on my screen. So we'll get to that, Kristen. So did you grow up a certain like faith, like a tradition of like, were your parents a certain?
So I had two parents who were forced to go to church every single Sunday, one Catholic, one Southern Baptist. And with us, they were like, you do what you want. So, you grow up in small town Texas. It means you go and then you don't go. You go to this one, then you don't go. And you kind of dabble in everything. And, I went through all of that stuff in life, to where you went to that church because your buddy did. You went to that camp because your friend invited you. And you went with your grandma to this one.
Especially in the town where you grew up.
What's that?
Especially in the size of town that you probably grew up in.
Right. Yeah, no, that's right. So my parents, weren't really big on it. My grandparents were very big on religion. And so I've sort of, I don't like feeling like I don't know everything in something. So I've read and gotten really involved and tried to, flesh it out for myself. But in small town Texas, it's not about basically filling in the gaps on intellectual conflict in your brain about that.
All right, gotcha. Actually, right now, Tammy Watts and I are planning a prayer event in town. We'll talk about that toward the end of the program. She just called me, so she must have her ears ringing because we've mentioned Tammy and Michael Watts in this program. Kristen, thanks for writing this question. I'm going to pull it up here, and then we'll ask this to Justin. If you could change or improve one thing about the dynamics and culture of San Antonio, what would it be and why? Thanks, Kristen, for that.
Why are you giving me that question? That's a tough question.
Yeah, I'll answer it too.
So I think the most important thing for me to do is learn by listening. As you said, you and I are both in a different boat. We don't deal with some of the issues that other people deal with. I have always felt like education is kind of the backbone to answering some of those issues related to poverty. And kind of two different worlds that people live in here. So for me, if I could change anything about the dynamics would be about disparate education opportunities throughout the city. I mean, depending on, what zip code you live in, you're stepping into a different situation. Culturally, I mean, I like San Antonio. I could culturally say there should be a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that, and a better airport and maybe some more museums. But I mean, really, I think at the end of the day, San Antonio's in the right direction. We just need to make sure that our rising, our rising ship rises everybody. And I think that's where we're missing. And I think education's a big part of that.
No, that's great. My normal co-host Becca would love that answer. She's all about education. So thanks, Kristen. There's one thing I can improve about the dynamics. I talked a little bit about earlier because Justin asked that question to me in a way. And I talked about generational poverty and the poverty that we often see throughout San Antonio, and what level of rate of poverty that we have in this city compared to other cities. I think that's something that's very needs to be discussed, and I don't think we've had policies really address it. We've had campaigns, we've had various discussions about it, all ways that we've had think tanks and commissions and I don't think we've really addressed the reasons why people are in poverty, and that goes back to some of our redlining and the way we place people in San Antonio, and it's something that I think we need to just address more and more each and every day. But the culture of San Antonio, I wish that Fiesta was more culturally correct. I feel like Fiesta is great. I love it. I participate in a lot of the events for the fundraisers there, but sometimes when I go and watch those parades in San Antonio, when it comes to culture, I'm not talking about anything serious here. I think that it'd be nice to see a more true diversity represented in some of the celebrations that we have in San Antonio when it comes to like simple cultural things. I don't know what you meant by culture, but I took dynamics as more of a improve the dynamics to something very serious like generational poverty, and maybe that's what you meant too. But I read the question. So, Justin, do you see any other questions that are different on your screen?
Well, I can't see your screen, but no.
Okay, good. Both of us have known Ron Nierenberg, our mayor. He's our current mayor, and probably supported him in different ways in his last two campaigns. What drew you to our mayor, and you have a good relationship with him. What is one like attribute that you saw in him that you really appreciated and said, I can get behind this even when I don't agree with him all the time?
I think Ron is wonky. Like, I think he really cares about kind of the minutia of the issues that he's dealing with. And I think it's important to know the minutia, especially in local government. I mean, Ron will talk to you about sidewalks and water drainage, and he will be really detailed about it. And I think that's really what you want at the end of the day with a local politician. I mean, we all want to talk about the fight about Chick-fil-A in the airport, but at the end of the day, that doesn't really affect you and I. My sidewalks do. And so I think knowing how wonky he was about that just through general conversations, I thought that's going to be a good guy to run the city, because those are the things that really affect us day to day in a city from our city government.
You want a local city geek is what you want.
I mean, yeah, you do. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think that Chick-fil-A, speaking, not like we've ever talked about it too much at Pub Theology, but when you see issues like that arise up, right? How do you interpret that? When you see an issue like that invade our local government, and it even influence our state government with so many anti-laws against what we were doing, and how do you interpret that? How do you navigate that in your world?
I kind of don't. I mean, honestly, it's the red meat stuff to get a whole bunch of people worked up. It's chumming the waters.
Sure.
It's really not a big relevant discussion in my mind, because whether we have a Chick-fil-A in the airport at the end of the day isn't going to affect whether or not, I've got roads that are drivable. The schools have, air conditioning that works. I mean, those are just the issues that actually matter to us day to day. But, you can go back to George W. Bush's second election when they decided to put gay marriage amendments on ballots all across America, and they say that really secured his second win. Those things get people worked up, but those things aren't the things that affect you and I.
Sure. At least most of us. Yeah. Hey, please, you know what? We're going to ask that question. We have a few listeners live right now. And if you could change one thing in San Antonio, dynamic or culturally, you can post that comment. You don't always have to ask us questions if you have a comment. And even if you're watching this video after we're live and you're watching this days later or hours later, please post your comments of where you think that San Antonio could improve and be a better city, either with its dynamics or cultural implications. Got any more questions, Justin?
Well, I mean, I like this format. I've never done this, to have like a live streaming and people respond and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, it's different every week. Like, I'm getting used to it. I'm never the person answering the questions too. It's only happened once in Pub Theology where they interviewed me about the caravan. All the other times I've been the dork asking the questions.
So I always end my shows with guest wish lists. I want to know who sort of your wish list would include, who you could get on the show. Mine's always Pop. Pop's always number one.
Yeah, that's my number. That's for sure. I said I would quit Pub Theology. I would end it. Right. And especially, so I will try to say, Coach Pop, when he hosted Cornel West, I don't remember this. Cornel West is a Black theologian. He's also like, he's a very big liberal. He has great books about race. He's a theologian, liberal, kind of liberation theologist. He interviewed Pop, and Pop interviewed him at a high school here in San Antonio, like a few years ago.
Is that true?
It is.
Never heard of
that. That is like my dream. Like, theology meets Coach Pop, and imagine the conversations they had. It was closed to the public. It was only open for this one school. That would be like getting Coach Pop to talk about social issues and religion, which he knows about. I think he knows more than we, than he gives away, even though he's a pretty outspoken guy. That would be my dream. I feel like we could get really deep with him in Pub Theology about theology or philosophy, because I mean I've never even got to meet Cornel West, and he got to interview a black theologian. It's one of my favorite theologians in all time, and that was my dream. If I could get those guys back in San Antonio, I would quit the show.
So Cornel West, really, is he that respected as a theologian? Because I know him because of politics. I mean, he's always a very
trouble there, just like we all do. Like all theology pastors, Christians, they get in trouble when they dive too much, and he probably is controversial in his political way. But as a professor, what he teaches, he's a very outstanding professor in his field. So.
All right, who else is on the wish list? I always do 3 at the end of every show. It started.
It changes. You know, I sometimes, you know, my favorite, I'll tell you this, my favorite guest was Simran from Trinity University. He's a Sikh theologian. Simran, do you know him? He has a brother named Darsh who also played basketball at Trinity. Was, I think, the very first Sikh collegiate basketball player. But he speaks about misidentity in religion, especially Islamic phobia, because a lot of people think that
Sikhs are Muslims.
Yeah. And that was when I realized what people really wanted out of Pub Theology. We invited him, and over 100 people came really early on to Pub Theology in the back room of the Friendly Spot. And that's when I thought, oh man, this is what people really want. You know, sometimes when I bring in people who I think are going to be good, maybe like even if I bring Ron back, or if I bring a counsel person back, sometimes the room is empty because people are expecting to hear what they want to hear, right? It's those discussions, I think, that really people want. So I already think that way. I think, can I get somebody in the community? A lot of people don't understand, but they want to understand. A lot of people don't know about Sikh identity and Sikh theology and what it's like. So I think a lot of people genuinely came to hear Simran. And I think a guest like that, you know, when it comes to a political guest, I would love to interview Cheryl Scully. That would, especially with her book coming up, that has to be on your list somehow. But politically, that'd be like that. Locally, just for fun, San Antonio geeks like us. But I think it's guests like Simran that I have, and I think that's why I answered Coach Pop and Cornel West. But you know, there's other leaders that I haven't gotten to speak with, and
Charles Butt.
Charles Butt would be great. Yeah, the Butt family in general is the HEB Foundation and how that all interacts. That'd be a great conversation. What's your favorite? What's your other than Coach Pop?
Pop's always number one. Charles Butt has made his way into the top 3. I'm sure he's very by this. You know, I'll share a Charles Butt story. I love San Antonio because how accessible it is. So I went to a fundraiser at his house for a politician out of Corpus Christi. This had to be 10 years ago now. Juan Rodriguez, maybe. And he was a big public education advocate. And so it was a public education. Charles Butt's politics are public education, and he will give money to that. Doesn't care what political party you are. So I'm there, and I'm walking around his house in King William, and it's a weird like time capsule of, I don't know how to describe it. They're old like tube TVs that probably don't work, but they're kind of just, I don't know, for props. And so he walks up to me and he's like, would you like a tour of my house? And I was like, of course. So Charles Butt takes me all around his house, upstairs, downstairs, and then he takes me down like a basement deal. But you like walk down like a couple stairs, and then off to the sides, this big wine room. And then you go down a few more stairs, and there's a super long hallway that's almost like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It's neon, it's you know, UV lights, whatever those tube lights are called. What are they called? Yeah. You know, those long tube lights, and it's white walls and it's white floors.
Fluorescent lights?
Yeah, those. Yeah. And so you walk down this long hallway and you come up and you're in this time capsule of a weight room from 1970. It's Nautilus equipment, chrome. It's shiny as can be. It looks like it's never been used. And all these pictures of bodybuilders around the wall. And it was just a very strange experience. And I remember him telling me that everybody thought he had a tunnel that went into HEB, but he doesn't. Yes, but he was such a nice man.
No, that's great. I have always wanted to interview Henry Najum. he gives a lot of money to great organizations. He's been single, I believe, his whole life, if I might be mistaken. But I just think it's a fascinating guy, and cares deeply about certain topics, especially children in San Antonio that are in poverty. He's been a big contributor to SAM Ministries and just projects around. I would love to interview him and just his heart. I think a lot of people may know him in certain circles, but what a big person in our community that does so much good that a lot of people don't know about. That'd be somebody locally that I would really like. And then there's people nationally that, of course, I would interview. Like, I would love to interview Jimmy Carter or like Desmond Tutu. But they're not coming to Pub Theology San Antonio. So I'll let that off the wish list. So
Jimmy Carter might do it online.
Yeah, I would have to have Shannon Davis come help me. She's that lawyer. She's on the board of elders with him. There's like 13 people in this group around the world with like Desmond Tutu, and she's one of them in the advisory group there. And they're like world leaders that just tackle huge issues. So I think she was probably one of our best guests. I'm going to do a thing because I kind of regret not recording some of these great conversations with Simran and Shannon Davis. I'm going to go back and do like a remix where we're going to invite them back when we were doing during COVID and just like rehab the conversation so a lot of people can hear what the kind of the cool ones we've done in Pub Theology in the past. Yeah. So
I forgot to record this, so you're gonna have to send me the audio.
Oh, you did? You forgot to hit the button. We even talked about it.
No.
That's funny. So what do you see coming up here? What do you think are some of the local issues that are going to matter? And this doesn't have to be politically a question. This is not maybe like coming up in the next few years in San Antonio. What are some of the things that you think are gonna creep up and be a big deal for people in local involvement?
So I think how we come out of this is going to be a big deal. I think, Ron talked about how this is an opportunity, and I think there's a lot of discussion about how he is making an opportunity to sort of change the dynamics of the city, including education and workforce retraining. I think that's going to be a big deal. I think the city's going to have to take a hard look at itself, being a hospitality industry when things like this happen. I mean, we're very vulnerable. I think the access to technology and internet, I think that's going to be really highlighted by what we're going through now. In the long term, I think things like charter schools are going to have to become an issue at some point. I mean, we've created this very real two-tier system in San Antonio, more so than maybe any city in Texas, where charter schools have such influence. I mean, you have charter school advocates that are part of the nonprofits running for school boards. Sure. So, I mean, that's a really strange thing. And both of my parents were public school teachers, so to me, that matters a lot.
That'd be a great person to interview, the leader of SA Charter Moms, which is a national kind of like Facebook group. She's here in San Antonio, if you know Inga, and that's a great.
I know, but somebody reached out to me 2 weeks ago on my Alamo Hour stuff and said I should interview her because obviously I have thoughts on charter schools. And
yeah, that'll be a great discussion. She would love to have it with you.
Yeah, I mean, I have no interest in getting in a fight with somebody about that. I know she's got a very, she's got a personal story, and who am I to tell her personal story is wrong? And charter schools serve the now purpose for a lot of people, but do they serve the long-term purpose for the city and our public education as a state? And that's a different conversation than did they provide my child a better school, when they were 5 years old than the alternatives. So, I mean, those are two different conversations, but they both need to be had, I think, over the long term for our city.
Wow. That I think that, you would have I don't think she would get in debate with you. I think she would just talk to you. I had her on Becca McNeil. It's one of the first times we had Becca McNeil as my co-host, and she interviewed Inga and their friends in the educational world. Also like somebody like Mark Larson from formerly of KIPP Academy. He used to be the CEO of KIPP Academy San Antonio. He went to a citywide initiative, sometimes nonprofit, and he just left that. So there's some great people I think that could discuss it without a debate or trying to argue a certain cause.
Politically, I find it fascinating how charter schools have managed to become a darling of the progressive millennials as well, which is sort of a strange, no,
it is
bedfellows. And I've asked people about it, and I've had some friends that were, progressives, millennials who were into that world. And even they sort of had a hard time explaining sort of the relationship. I mean, just politically, it's a strange set of bedfellows. I think that's interesting. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I think it's an interesting set of bedfellows.
All right. So if you still want to ask a question, we have a few minutes left, I think, more or less. You can ask a question to us. There's a few people listening. There's actually a couple more. So please, somebody be bold enough to ask a question to kind of close out our question and answer session. But until we get that, I believe somebody listening right now will be bold enough to ask a question. So either Phil or Helen or Lindsay, try to ask a good question. During COVID-19, what has been your favorite? So you talk about hidden gems in San Antonio. In COVID, trying to get out and safely get out, what has been the favorite, one thing that unexpectedly you've enjoyed about San Antonio during COVID-19?
Well, I had a child during COVID-19, so that
okay. COVID, there's a name for it. Is it COVID baby or something?
So it was born during COVID.
Yeah, you didn't have it during. That's a different name.
That's a different thing. So that's been sort of its own set of facts, which honestly has allowed me to be in town more, which has been fantastic. Outside of that very personal story, we really just went kind of nuts a little bit on like food delivery and like all of these random things that popped up to serve people who did not want to go out. We had boxes of fruit being delivered one week and vegetables the next week, and Szechuan House now delivers up to 20 miles. So that's been awesome. So we kind of went a little overboard on that. And then we also set up my yard into we don't have to leave. So we have tetherball and disc golf and horseshoes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So we had to create an environment where we can stay home because Lindsay is horrified of getting coronavirus. Yeah.
I get you. You spoke about the Szechuan House. They do deliver at a wider range now. They're kind of on Ingram Road ish and 410. But they're one of the 3 restaurants that support Corazon Ministry, so we can provide 7 meals a week during COVID-19 for our homeless guests on the streets in downtown San Antonio. So our ministry cooks 4 times, more or less 4 times a week, and then we have restaurants support that. It's farm to table. In downtown San Antonio, they cook a meal for us. Szechuan House cooks a meal, and Chick-fil-A cooks a meal, and they deliver that. So we have a wide range of restaurants supporting. But I'm very grateful to the food that actually it might be the favorite meal of the week when Szechuan House cooks the protein and the pasta and the rice for our guests, and they've done it faithfully. I think they've already crossed thousands of meals that they've cooked for us during this pandemic, and that's just locally downtown. So I'm grateful.
Makes me happy to be spending my money with them.
Yeah, so for sure, support them just for multiple reasons. Yeah. But I really appreciate Kristen and her team at the Szechuan House. Any other last closing thoughts? If we don't get a question, we don't get a question. But any lasting thoughts in this conversation, Justin?
Well, I mean, I always end mine with, my wish list. So I've already got Pop and I've got Charles Butt, and I always do 3, maybe 5. Also, I want to do Patty Mills and Lonnie Walker because it's great.
The whole Spurs. You want to interview every Spur?
No, well, probably. But you also, they're oddly involved in our community.
They are. Patty Mills still lives here in downtown San Antonio.
And Lonnie Walker's out cleaning up, graffiti. I mean, it's rare to see professional athletes get that involved in the towns in which they live because so often they're sort of, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be here type deal. So they're always on the deal. And I think Patty Mills just gave a bunch of money to one of the women's shelters, I believe. And so he's always on it. And then Jackie Earl Haley, because he's here and he's fantastic as Rorschach in The Watchmen. So,
that's right.
I haven't done an actor. I've done Tim Maloney, who is producing a Bravo reality show.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Do you have any upcoming guests that you would like to actually talk about on the Alamo Hour? Do you have anybody lined up?
So Nico's supposed to come on. Nico LaHood is supposed to come on.
And you say you don't talk about politics. There's no way you're getting out of that one, man.
Well, Nico is also very religious.
He is. He's a very faithful evangelical Protestant Assembly of God, something like that. Yeah.
He's also got his own podcast.
Oh, he does?
Yeah.
Does it surprise me?
I think the next guest will be Poncho Navarez, who's a state rep out of Eagle Pass.
Okay.
He is no longer running for office, but he was a state rep for a long time. He's a personal injury lawyer as well. Jerry Goldstein, who represented, Hunter Thompson, and Jerry Goldstein's probably the most. He could write a book about all the people he represented. He's a lawyer here in town, a criminal lawyer. He's done more for you and I on Fourth Amendment and Bill of Rights issues than you'd ever know. So we've got some good people coming up. It's just getting them scheduled.
Wow. We have a couple of people lined up next week, same time. So thanks for doing this at our time. I know that you record at different times throughout the week, but so thank you for sticking to our schedule. That was kind of you to do that. But we on Wednesday nights, next Wednesday, we have Reverend Dorian Williams, who is a pastor in San Antonio, also a former Air Force captain and pilot. He is going to speak about the Pray SA events that him and Max Lucado and Tammy Watts and myself have been planning with a bunch of people throughout San Antonio. That's happening Sunday nights on August 9th and 16th at the Freeman Coliseum, not in the Coliseum, but it's a park and pray event where people can come and park and pray and just listen to it through their car radio. There's not going to be even like something you can really see, like a stage. Max will lead different people in prayers. You'll hear voices that we don't even announce what voices are praying, but it's a diverse group of people from different faith backgrounds within Christianity. And so we're having that event this Sunday night. And so in between the two events, I'm going to interview Dorian about how that went and what he learned and what are the prayer requests people said in San Antonio. So there'll be a time where people can text in their hurts or their laments or their scares or their fears. And so Dorian will talk about that. And then we also have Dr. and Reverend Keely Petty, who is the chair person for the MLK Commission, which puts on the march and the big celebration on the east side of San Antonio on MLK Monday. And so they're just going to have a discussion about race. And I think that's one thing that we've been trying to do better at Pub Theology is has a more diverse racial guests, especially during the Black Lives Matter movement. So that's next week's Pub Theology. And sometimes our guests pop up throughout the week. We learn about something that happens and we want to interview it in the next 7 days. So sometimes our guests are really, really planned out and some of them pop up like really we planned this pretty quickly. And I'm grateful for that. So I don't think we have any more questions unless somebody pops up in the next 2 seconds. So
Lindsay just added Father Kevin Fowles from Holy Redeemer would be a good guest for Pub Theology.
Where are you seeing this?
I mean, I guess mine pop up. So before that, it's two people talking about Szechuan House.
Wow. Something's up with my thing. Do you have any others that you see?
No.
Okay. See, I thought that was weird when you said that popped up last time. I think just something is happening on my end, which is the fun facts of.
Have you had Father Kevin Fowles from Holy Redeemer?
No, but I will. I will find that comment on our probably Facebook page. I'm trying to look to see before we end if somebody put a comment on any of our other.
Oh yeah, you posted this on a lot of things.
Yeah, sometimes they, sometimes they ask questions and different things, but sometimes I can see them pop up. But you know what? I think in your hour, it's the Alamo hour, not 2 hours. So I want to respect your podcast and your listeners. You're probably like, y'all are talking way too long. I am done with this. So you just had your first child?
I did 2 months ago.
Wow. Name?
Lincoln Dexter Hill.
Why did you name him Lincoln?
I mean, who's a better sort of illustration of what you want from a human being than Abraham Lincoln?
Okay, so it's named after Abraham. I would have figured it was, but I didn't know if it was a family name or what.
Dexter is great grandfather's name.
We should have Phil Watkins on. You know what you should do? You said that you were going to do a podcast with Phil, then he got cut from the program?
I never said that, but I should do one with Phil.
I thought you said that early on that you were thinking about doing a podcast with him one time.
I need to do that. No, I was going to come to a Pub Theology.
Oh, I see. Oh, with him. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I got you now. Well, Phil, we should have Phil on. When I was at St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Kerrville, I got to know the Mosty family, which they're lawyers in Kerrville. Mm-hmm. Do you know the Mosty law firm?
I know who they are. I don't know them personally.
Yeah, Richard Mosty is the kind of the grandfather of the group now, and he got to be the defense lawyer for 4 murder cases in the 70s and 80s. That is unheard of. Like when you're a defense attorney, you might get one good one in your career, right? Especially in Kerrville, Texas, right? And Kerr County. And he had 4 ones that were like nationally famous.
Wow.
The Kerrville Slave Ranch that happened in Kerrville in the 80s, where they were picking up people who were homeless and forcing them into labor somewhere around that area. And he defended them. And he's a strong Christian Episcopalian, a man of faith. He'd be a great interview for you to talk about like being a defense attorney, defending, and he has some great stories. Of the most famous case he had of a 18-year-old kid who was drug dealing and I see of them popping up now. The comments are now popping up, but this 18-year-old kid was in Florida dealing drugs, Justin, and to try to gain like street cred. He read about a murder in Texas and said that he committed it. And it was undercover officers that were doing this drug deal. And they were like, what? So they followed through. They called Texas. They were like, this murder really happened exactly the way he said it. He got arrested, put on trial in Kerrville, Texas, this like young kid. And Richard Mosty defended him, and like people went crazy and really angry at Richard for they had a confession in a way, right? And he went through the truth and found all this evidence and fought. The sheriffs had to protect his home. Like so many people were upset in Kerrville that like this Christian man would be defending this murderer. And you really should interview him. For lawyers in town, Richard Mosty is like really a famous lawyer in Texas. And I think that'd be a fascinating interview for you.
You didn't see the comment that said Phil went outside to smoke and drink. So
well, you should be, probably. I don't smoke, but I'll definitely drink with Phil any day of the week.
He's a cigar smoker.
Yeah. But his cigars probably is what you said.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe he puts a little something in it. I'm just kidding. All right. So thank you, Justin, for being on Pub Theology.
And I've enjoyed it.
Yeah. I hope this wasn't just rambling. The ramblings of 2 San Antonio dorks, who just love to talk about dorky things in San Antonio.
Yeah.
So.
Well, let's see you again, man.
Good to see you, and take care, and check out thealamohour.com anytime you want. Oh, hey, there it is. I saw the suggestion. Thank you, Lindsay, for suggesting Father Kevin, and I will, from Holy Redeemer, I'll definitely get him on. So
awesome. Thanks, Gavin.
All right. See you guys.